Chapter 8. She was 12. So was her best friend, Molly. And this was a first for each of them. Never before had they been in a haunted house, or one purported to be so. It was in reality an old abandoned farmhouse that had been transformed by the J.C.'s into the abode of the living dead. Here bone-rattling skeletons with rotting flesh sprang before shrieking children, while nearby maggots played busily in empty sockets of decaying corpses. Deeper still, within its infernal bowels, a moon-bathed, tombstone-studded graveyard erupted into an instant nightmare as a bony hand suddenly burst through the topsoil and clawed the air. It had frightened Molly, but not as much as it had Brooks. Her nightmare had only begun. That evening, whether in her dreams or in reality, she doesn't know which to this day, ice formed on the inside of her bedroom windows, and steam puffed from her nostrils as the temperature plunged to near zero. Even worse, there were voices, hundreds of them, muddled, guttural, whispery. At first they seemed far, far away, and then they drew nearer and nearer, until finally she could make them out. "Let us in, you," one said. Its voice was deep and moist, as if it had ricocheted about the dank walls of a well. Another quickly followed it. "Oh, sweet thing!" This time the voice was syrupy. "Daddy's dead," it said, its line voice dripping with counterfeit concern. "Molly says you're an ugly pig," taunted a third. Amused, the others jeered in unison. "Here, piggy, piggy, piggy," they chanted. Their voices became louder and louder until, horror-stricken, Brooks clutched the blanket tightly about her neck. Her knuckles blanched and her eyes frantically scoured the empty room. At first, she saw nothing. But gradually, cloud-like apparitions materialized. They were amorphous at first, but each, almost imperceptibly, underwent a transformation, taking on a more recognizable shape, though not like anything else she had ever seen before. These entities were hideously grotesque, displaying a variety of unearthly features: vertically slit, bulbous eyes, dagger teeth that dripped slime, elongated nostrils that oozed with a foul mucus, and folds of sometimes leathery, sometimes gelatinous skin. Each was vastly different, and yet they all had one thing in common. They were rank, gaggingly so. And just when it seemed she could take no more, her unconscious mind scrambled to her rescue. As if to release her from the dread that had ballooned within her, it catapulted her torso into an upright position and contorted her face to make way for a scream. When finally it ceased, she was alone. Even so, like the smell of locker-room sweat long after the last player has left, she sensed a lingering, almost palpable presence. Though she could see nothing, her eyes vigilantly combed the room. Her trembling hand lifted the phone from its cradle, while a practiced finger dialed Molly's number. As if to shield her conversation from prying ears, she cupped the receiver with both hands and listened to the dial tone as it rang and rang. How many times it had done so she couldn't remember, nor could Molly have known. She was fast asleep. When finally she did hear the blatant ring of her bedside phone, she fumbled for the receiver and blindly drew it to her ear. "Hello?" she said. And before Brooks could answer, she asked, "What time is it?" "Molly?" Brooks said, ignoring her question. "Brooks, is that you? Are you all right?" Molly sat up in bed, and for the next 5 minutes sponged up Brooks' recounting of her horrifying experience. When finally she had emptied herself of the last ounce of it, Molly reassured her. "Oh, it's just a nightmare," she said, adding, "There's nothing to worry about." Just a nightmare? Nothing to worry about? Well, that's what she had believed then. Now, as a Christian adult, familiar with the origins of All Hallows' Eve, she was of a different opinion. Now she knew that this was the night the god of the Celts was believed to have resurrected those who had died the previous year. The night he would transmute them into zombies who would wander about demanding food. To ward them off, the horrified Englanders would carve scary faces on pumpkins or squash. Unfortunately, That didn't repel the most insidious threat that awaited them, the Druid priest. It was they who would barge into their home, snatch one of their daughters, and drag her off to a religious ceremony, one in which participants donned animal heads and skins. One of them would clasp a knife in both hands, raise it high above his head, and plunge it into her heart, splattering her blood on all who stood nearby. Even today, though human sacrifices are rare, witches, Satanists, and modern Druids perform similar ceremonies. Halloween is, for them, the chief of their 4 major festivals, their Grand Witch Sabbat. Once Brooks knew that, she refused to observe this holiday. What's more, she exhorted others to do the same. Of course, she soon discovered that for some, that was like blowing one's nose on the flag at a VFW meeting. "Let me ask you something," she once said to a Christian friend who had been inside the church only when decorated with poinsettias and Easter lilies. "Bible says we're to do everything for the glory of God. Now tell me, how does Halloween glorify God?" Well, of course, it doesn't. It didn't then, nor does it now. And the memory of her once frivolous attitude toward this unholy day made her shudder as step by step she climbed higher and higher, near the loft where George Eiders had taken his last choking breath, where he had hung for days, weeks, bloated and stunk. As Brooks stepped onto the planking of the attic floor, she imagined she could even smell it. It was as if the pungent fumes of his fetid corpse had seeped into the birch pores of the attic trusses like acid into skin. That thought was instantly ejected when, amidst the flickering candlelight, she heard something. It was a fluttering sound, like wings, and whirling about. Brooks thrust the candle before her and strained to see what made it, but it was no use. And then she heard it again. Worse, she felt it. Or a whiff of air stirred as it suddenly whizzed past her ear. She ducked, jerked her hands to her mouth, and screamed. It was followed by the shattering of the saucer on the wooden floor and the thud of the candle as it plopped upside down and extinguished itself. And there she stood, alone. Gone were the fitful shadows. They were replaced by an inky silence that pervaded the room. To Brooks, it seemed as if she were in a tomb, buried alive. Had Noel heard her? She dared not scream again, lest the thing that had swished by her, sizing her up, swooped down now for the kill. And with her fingers still pressed tightly to her mouth and her breath bated, she listened, hoped, until finally, thank God, she heard Noel's voice. "Brooks, where are you?" he shouted from the foot of the attic stairs. Now there was no choice. She had to risk being heard by it. "I'm up here," she said, "in the attic." Noel, his candle jolting before him, bounded up the narrow attic steps, 2 at a time, and soon they were embracing. "What is it?" Noel glanced quickly at Brooks, and then about the attic in search of whatever had frightened her. "There's something up here." Not knowing what to expect, Noel's arm tightened about Brooks' shoulders, while the other played Statue of Liberty, extending his candle high in the air. "There it is," Noel said, as the light of his candle lit up 2 glowing dots of red. "What is it?" "Well, I didn't know better. I would say it's a mouse with wings. Since I do, I'll call it a bat." Relieved, Brooks retraced her steps down to the second-floor corridor, with Noel close behind. He closed the attic door behind them and put his arm around his shoulders. "I'll capture the beast tomorrow," he said. "After all, we don't want any bats in our belfry, do we?" "Cute," Brooks said. Midnight. Earlier that day, believing it best to restrict their movement to one well-lit area until the power was on, Noel had dragged a mattress down to the living room. Now they were lying on it. Noel lay on his back. His interwoven fingers cupped his head. Beside him a single candle glimmered. Brooks was on her side, facing Noel, her elbow on the mattress and her palm cushioning her cheek. They talked about the debate, and about what it would be like spending the summer in Tennessee. At 12:30 they fell silent. "I love you," Brooks said, smiling. "I love you too," Noel said, and cupping his hand behind the last candle, he blew it out.